In a small, forgotten village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, I, Arjun, lived a life that was anything but extraordinary. My days were filled with the same monotonous routine, helping my father in the fields, tending to our meager crops, and dreaming of a life beyond the village's borders. My family was poor, and every day was a struggle. My father, a humble farmer, toiled under the scorching sun, while my mother stitched clothes late into the night to make ends meet. Despite our hardships, I clung to a dream of change, of something bigger. But life had other plans. One fateful morning, my father collapsed in the fields, clutching his chest. His face was pale, and his breathing was labored. Panic surged through me as I rushed to his side. The village healer was called, but his diagnosis was grim. My father needed expensive medicines and prolonged treatment. Our savings, already scarce, were drained within days. The weight of responsibility fell on my shoulders, and for the first time, I felt the crushing burden of despair. The fields, once a source of sustenance, now seemed like a cruel reminder of our helplessness. To make matters worse, a relentless drought swept through the village. The crops withered, and the soil turned to dust. Our once thriving fields became barren, and hunger gnawed at our stomachs. The villagers whispered among themselves, their voices filled with pity. "Arjun, you should leave this village," they said. "There's nothing left for you here." But their words only fueled my determination. I couldn't abandon my family, not when they needed me the most. Deep down, I knew running away wasn't the answer. I had to stay and fight, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. I began working as a laborer in nearby fields, earning a pittance for backbreaking work. My hands blistered and my body ached, but I pushed through the pain. Every coin I earned went toward my father's medicines, but it was never enough. The days blurred into nights and the nights into days. My friends, who once laughed and joked with me, began to drift away. They couldn't understand why I stayed in the village, why I didn't seek a better life elsewhere. But I couldn't explain it to them. I just knew I had to keep going. One evening, as I returned home exhausted, I found my mother sitting in the dim light of a single oil lamp. Her hands were clasped tightly, and her shoulders shook with silent sobs. The sight shattered me. There was no food on the table, no hope in her eyes. I felt like a failure, unable to provide for the people I loved most. That night, I lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering if there was any way out of this endless cycle of suffering. The village seemed like a prison, and I was trapped within its walls. The next morning, I decided to seek guidance from the village's wise old saint. He lived in a small hut at the edge of the forest, surrounded by towering trees and the whispers of the wind. As I approached his hut, I felt a strange sense of calm. The saint greeted me with a warm smile, his eyes filled with wisdom. I poured out my heart to him, telling him about my father's illness, the drought, and the overwhelming sense of hopelessness that consumed me. He listened patiently, his expression unreadable. When I finished, the saint handed me 3 objects: a carrot, an egg, and a handful of coffee beans. "Boil these in water," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and return to me tomorrow." I was puzzled by his request, but did as he instructed. That night, I boiled the carrot, egg, and coffee beans, watching as they transformed in the bubbling water. The carrot softened, the egg hardened, and the coffee beans turned the water into a rich, aromatic brew. I couldn't understand the significance of his lesson, but I trusted his wisdom. The next day I returned to the saint's hut, carrying the boiled items with me. He looked at me with those piercing eyes and asked, "What happened to the carrot?" I replied, "It became soft." He nodded and asked, "And the egg?" I said, "It hardened inside." Finally he asked, "And the coffee?" I answered, "It changed the water, giving it flavor and color." The saint smiled, and in that moment, I felt a glimmer of understanding. He explained that life's challenges were like boiling water. They revealed our true nature. Some people, he said, are like the carrot. They start strong but become weak and break under pressure. Others are like the egg. They appear the same on the outside but become hardened and emotionless inside. But the coffee beans, they don't let the situation change them. Instead, they transform the situation in their favor. His words struck a chord deep within me. I realized I didn't want to be like the carrot or the egg. I wanted to be like the coffee beans, resilient, adaptable, and capable of turning adversity into opportunity. With renewed determination, I left the saint's hut, my mind racing with possibilities. I knew I couldn't rely on laboring in the fields forever. I needed a plan, a way to create something lasting. The villagers had always relied on farming, but the drought had shown the fragility of that life. I began to think of alternative ways to support my family. The idea of starting a small business took root in my mind, but I had no money, no resources. Still, I refused to give up. I would find a way, no matter how difficult the path ahead seemed. I decided to take a bold step and approach the villagers for help. I explained my plan to start a small shop selling vegetables and fruits from our farm. At first, they were skeptical, their faces filled with doubt, but I poured my heart out, sharing the saint's wisdom and my determination to change our circumstances. Slowly, their skepticism turned into support. A few kind souls lent me money, and with their help, I set up a modest stall in the village square. It wasn't much, but it was a start. I worked tirelessly, waking up before dawn to arrange the produce and staying late to ensure everything was perfect. The first few days were tough. Customers were few, and the income was barely enough to cover the costs. But I refused to lose hope. I started experimenting with different strategies, offering discounts, arranging the produce attractively, and even sharing stories of our farm with the customers. Slowly but surely, people began to notice. They appreciated the freshness of the produce and the passion behind my efforts. Word spread, and soon, my little stall became a hub of activity in the village. The once empty square now buzzed with life, and I felt a sense of pride I had never known before. As the days turned into weeks, my business began to flourish. The income from the stall allowed me to afford better treatment for my father. His health improved, and the sparkle returned to my mother's eyes. The villagers, who had once advised me to leave, now praised my hard work and determination. They saw me not as a helpless boy, but as a young man who had turned adversity into opportunity. Their respect filled me with a sense of accomplishment. But I knew this was just the beginning. I had bigger dreams, and I was determined to achieve them. One evening, as I closed the stall, I noticed a group of children playing nearby. They laughed and ran around, their carefree joy a stark contrast to the struggles I had faced. I realized then that my journey wasn't just about me. It was about creating a better future for the next generation. I decided to use a portion of my earnings to start a small school in the village. Education, I believed, was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty. The villagers supported the idea, and together we built a humble schoolhouse. It was a small step, but it was a step toward change. The school became a beacon of hope in the village. Children who had once spent their days helping in the fields now sat in classrooms, their minds filled with curiosity and dreams. I often visited the school, sharing my story and encouraging the children to never give up, no matter how tough life seemed. Their smiles and enthusiasm fueled my determination to keep pushing forward. The village, once plagued by despair, now buzzed with a newfound sense of purpose. We were no longer just surviving, we were thriving, and it was all because we had chosen to be like the coffee beans. But challenges still loomed on the horizon. The drought persisted, and the threat of famine hung over the village like a dark cloud. I knew I had to find a way to ensure our survival. I began researching drought-resistant crops and innovative farming techniques. With the help of a few knowledgeable villagers, I introduced new methods that conserved water and maximized yield. The results were promising, and soon other farmers began adopting these techniques. The once barren fields now showed signs of life, and the village's resilience became a testament to our collective strength. As the village prospered, my story began to spread beyond its borders. Travelers passing through would stop to hear about the young man who had turned his life around. They carried my tale to neighboring villages, inspiring others to face their challenges with courage and determination. I never sought fame or recognition, but I realized that my journey had become a source of hope for many. It was a humbling thought, and it reminded me of the saint's words that we have the power to transform our circumstances, no matter how dire they may seem. One day, a group of officials from the city visited our village. They had heard about our success and wanted to see it for themselves. As they walked through the bustling square and the thriving fields, Their expressions were a mix of awe and admiration. They offered to provide resources and support to further develop the village. It was an opportunity I had never imagined, and I knew it was a chance to create lasting change. With their help, we built better infrastructure, improved healthcare, and expanded the school. The village, once forgotten, now stood as a symbol of resilience and hope. Looking back, I realized how far we had come. The challenges that once seemed insurmountable had become stepping stones to a brighter future. My father's health had improved, my mother no longer cried at night, and the village was thriving. But more than that, I had discovered my own strength, the strength to face adversity head-on and turn it into opportunity. The saint's lesson had stayed with me, guiding me through every obstacle. I had chosen to be like the coffee beans, and in doing so, I had transformed not just my life, but the lives of everyone around me. As I stood in the village square, surrounded by the laughter of children and the chatter of villagers, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had tested me in ways I could never have imagined, but it had also given me the tools to overcome those tests. I knew that challenges would always come, but I was ready to face them. I had learned that the true measure of a person lies not in their circumstances, but in how they respond to them. And as long as I had the courage to keep going, I knew that no challenge was too great to overcome.